But doing that, getting over my fear of speaking, and then I would speak about things that would make me cry. And I would just intentionally do that. Just say whatever the hardest thing I had to say to cry in front of these people that I hardly knew got me to a point where I could share my story candidly with anybody. And I think that was unique too. And just seeing how helpful that was for veterans that I was working with made me realize, like, I don't want to take the time to get a business off the ground and hire employees for this. I'm just going to go all in on the programs and figure out how to help as many people as we can right away. That's really what spawned the organization, 23rd Veteran.
So we are privileged and honored to have Mike Waldron with 23rd Veteran on our podcast with us today. And we just want to start asking Mike about his journey after the Marine Corps. Just tell us a little bit about what that was like. Got out of the Marine Corps and then what happened over the next few years?
Yeah, and the pleasure to be here is all mine. I appreciate your time and inviting me on the podcast. So my journey beginning after the Marine Corps, I can begin that maybe right when I got out. So I was in the initial invasion to Iraq in 2003. I was in the infantry, and I got out of the Marine Corps within 6 months of returning from there. And some changes had happened in my brain when I was in combat, as they should. Yeah, I just didn't quite realize it at the time. I could tell that I had really good control over my emotions, and strong control over my emotions. If I chose not to get sad, I wouldn't get sad. If I chose not to get angry, I wouldn't get angry. And I thought that was a really good thing. I was married at the time, and my ex-wife didn't see that as a good thing. And in hindsight, I realized I couldn't selectively block my emotions. If I was blocking anger or sadness, I was also blocking happiness. I didn't get very excited. I was blocking love. I lost the ability to love for quite a while after the Marine Corps. And some other symptoms from what I'd call combat stress continued and worsened over the years. I had a lot of dreams, some really common ones that we have, where we can't find our weapons, or if I find my weapon, then it doesn't work. And if I get it to work, then I can't find ammo. And that we were constantly being overrun in my dreams, and there wasn't anything I could do to help my friends. And those dreams, I said, worsened. Came to where the combat was back in the U.S. and it came closer to home, and then it turned into becoming really close to home and doing things in my dreams to people that I love in my life, people that I was closest to. There was a 2007. I woke up from a dream because I was throwing up in my girlfriend's bed. And that was the first time that I realized, like, hey, maybe there is something to this combat stress. Maybe I should talk with somebody about this. Like, it probably isn't normal to be throwing up in the middle of the night because of your dreams. And then it was a year later, I was driving down the freeway, and all of a sudden my heart started racing and my chest was cramping, and I got tunnel vision. I couldn't really think. Blood pressure skyrocketed. I thought, oh my gosh, this is a heart attack. And I had someone riding with me in the vehicle. I pulled over on the freeway and we switched spots, and they brought me to the VA hospital, happened to be just a few minutes away, where I went to the emergency room, checked out my heart, said, I'm fine, sent me home. And I was thinking to myself, there's no way I'm fine. Like, that was really scary and it was painful. Like, clearly I'm dying here. Like, why am I getting sent home? And that happened a few more times over the next 2 weeks. I was in the hospital maybe 5 times, thinking I was having a heart attack. And then finally, they escorted me to what was called the Operation Iraqi Freedom Counseling Department. And I felt pretty out of place. Didn't really know why I was there. I was put on some medication. I didn't understand it. I didn't know what combat stress was. I didn't know what panic attacks were. I didn't know what anxiety was. But for the next 5 years, those things I was having, those panic attacks, is what that was on the freeway, which we could talk more about today. Those continued. I was having them every day. And it got to the point where I was having them 3-4 times a day. And life was really, really hard to live that way. It was the only thing that I can remember looking forward to was being asleep, just so I didn't have to be awake. So that brought me up to about 2012. And I moved to a different city up in northern Minnesota. When I was a kid, I loved visiting northern Minnesota. I love the outdoors, the fishing, skiing, hunting, all of that stuff. And I hadn't been doing that for a while. There wasn't much at all that I was enjoying in life. Um, but I kind of kicked myself in the butt one day. I'm like, okay, I knew I wanted to live up here for a reason. I got off the couch and I went down a ski hill, and I had a good time. I had a rush when I went off little jumps, and I was talking with people in the chairlift. And in hindsight, it was a pretty safe environment. There's two of us hanging in the middle of nowhere. It's not a crowded environment. Pretty safe, pretty easy to talk with someone. But that was the first time in a long time that I was just striking up conversations with strangers and felt comfortable doing it. And I started finding hope and happiness. And I got a gym membership, and I'm working out so I could get stronger legs to go off bigger jumps. And that continued until the snow melted, and I fell back onto the couch into isolation and back into my more severe symptoms again. And I yo-yoed a couple times like that before I realized it was that socialization, and that fitness, and that purpose. There was something about that was helping me find this hope and this happiness and pull out of those deep symptoms. So this is 2013, and this is the first time that I realized all of those things I was facing, those panic attacks and that anxiety for those 5 years, were related to combat. I had no idea. I didn't know I was having panic attacks the entire time. And I didn't know I had triggers from combat. But once I was able to make those connections, realized clearly something must have changed in me, in my brain, when I was in that hostile environment, or at least when I was in the Marine Corps. So that means my brain can change. So that's why I decided to study our memory, and learned a lot about our neuroplasticity, and learned a lot about chemicals that help in memory, why we're able to lock in these triggers from traumatic situations into our subconscious memory when we're not able to remember what we had for breakfast that morning, or what socks we were wearing that day. So there's something neurologically different there. Studied a lot of chemicals and happiness. What is happiness? Who are happy people, and how does that happen? Learned about positive psychology. So this brings us up to 23rd veteran. This is where I got together with a positive psychologist, psychotherapist, personal trainer, and we put together a 14-week program to help other veterans pull out of that and find hope and happiness just in a much quicker, more systematic way than I was able to stumble upon it.
Yeah, if we could just pause right there and go back and kind of delve into a little bit of your story a little bit more. You mentioned these anxiety attacks. You want to say more about that?
Like what it was for me, what it was like going through a panic attack, or more on the scientific level, what happens, why we experience those? What do you?
For you, like at an emotional level, what was that like for you?
Yeah, so bittersweet, a little more sweet than bitter. It's been 10 years since I've had a panic attack, an anxiety attack. So the bitter side of that is I don't get to connect as the way I used to with people that were serving. So I can speak out of my memory from 10 plus years ago. But what was most difficult about the actual attacks is that I thought I was dying. Like every time one would come on, I would be constantly checking my pulse. I'd be checking my blood pressure, which my blood pressure is elevated. I was dating a nurse for a while, and she would stay up with me most nights until 1, 2 in the morning, just like checking my blood pressure or bringing me to the hospital. And she didn't understand what was going on either. She was legitimately checking those things because there was legitimately something changing with me. So in hindsight, this would happen often at night because of my dreams. So the bedroom became a trigger. Every time I laid down in bed, I'm going back into this combat environment or into something else that's terrible that I'm going through every night. So yeah, in hindsight, I can see that now. I didn't see it then. For some reason, it was when I was in a vehicle, when I was at a movie theater, a restaurant, when I was in bed for quite a while. Like my solstice was the AM. When I'd wake up in the morning, I wouldn't have a panic attack for the first 4 to 6 hours. And I had a professional job at the time. I was managing U.S. courthouses and federal buildings, and I would go to work and just do my best to hide it. And it was always great before lunch at work. I didn't have to hide it because I was going to be okay. In the afternoons, I definitely did have to hide it. I'd take time off of work. But then they started happening in the morning, and that's when
Mm.
it was really hard to have hope for the future. If I could try to explain like what it is while I'm having a panic attack, all of my focus is just 100% in why am I dying and how do I survive. Like
Mm.
I've heard people give advice like read this during a panic attack, it'll help, or go to this website, and like doing those things, like it's so debilitating. I can't even do those. I have them often on airplanes, and I would grab the airplane magazine out of the seat in front of me and just to kind of hide what's going on, and I'd page through it and I'd try to read it and try to focus on it, and I couldn't even make out the words. I would just flip pages and make it look like I was reading.
Yeah. And then it sounds like in your story that as you began to make that shift up to kind of the more rural area of Minnesota back to where it was like a countryside, and you're skiing and you're outside in that wintertime, those panic attacks either dissipated or went away.
They dissipated for sure. Yep. So once I started getting into socializing, fitness, outdoors, uh, they went down from multiple times a day to multiple times a week until eventually I just stopped having them. I didn't stop having them, I don't think, because I was doing those things, but those things gave me the time and the clarity to realize why I was having panic attacks. Once I realized why I
Yeah.
was having them, once I identified what my triggers were, I was able to retrain my brain not to get triggered by those triggers to my old negative events. Like intentionally retrain my brain to relate those negative triggers to do positive events. So at the least, there's a
Yeah.
stopping point before my sympathetic nervous system kicks on, before I go into fight or flight, and I can decide, okay, is this triggering me to something that doesn't exist right now, to something it doesn't need to trigger me to? Because if that's the case, which it almost always is the case, I don't need to panic.
Yeah. So the part that I wonder about in your story, or the part I guess I'm really curious about, is, an individual can find healing in their own life, and it's a separate thing to take that healing and sort of become, an evangelist for others to find this same kind of healing. And not that you're necessarily an evangelist, but you now, from the sense that I have of you, is that you have a real sense of calling or vocation to bring this healing that you experience to other veterans. So maybe if you can talk a little bit about that sense of calling, if you will, to take this work to others rather than just, hey, I'm good now, so I'm good. Like you wanted to take it to other veterans.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I was talking with my friends from the Marine Corps. I stayed in touch with maybe a dozen. There's probably 4 that I'll talk with on a regular basis. None of us talked anything about these kind of symptoms, that stuff we're going through, our dreams, until I started pulling out of it and realized what was going on with myself. And I started bringing it up, just subtly bringing it up. And it turned out everybody that I stayed in touch with was going through the exact same symptoms. They had the loss of emotion. They had the dreams, and eerily similar dreams. We had almost the exact same stuff that was going on from what we could remember in our dreams. And then it became more anxiety, and then into the panic attacks. And like I mentioned, if somebody hasn't had a panic attack that's watching this is a very scary thing to believe you're dying when all you're doing is driving a car or laying in bed, and be having that happen every day. So having experienced that and knowing how terrible of a life that is to live is what really drove me to figure out a way to bring this to the people I served with. So initially that's in my mind. Like I was struggling, my buddies are struggling. Like I feel like I have an answer. There's a lot of answers out there. I feel like this is a really good one. And this isn't one that is being shared. This is unique. So that was the factor that, so I quit my job, got together with these people, put this program together so I could expand the program to help my friends. initially, I thought I was going to start a for-profit business. I actually did. I started the for-profit, and in my mind, the program, this 14-week program we're running, this would be a daily ritual that's required of our employees. So we'd hire veterans, we would do this in the morning, and then we would get on with our workday. And once I started helping veterans, once I actually was face to face, boots on the ground helping, I realized I was kind of good at it. Like I got to the point that I was able to share my story candidly. To do that, I joined a couple Toastmasters groups. It's an organization where you get together with people in the community and you just stand up and speak. And it was so scary for me. I was terrified of public speaking. I'd be just trembling like most of the day leading up to this. I'd have a hard time sleeping for a couple days before I had to talk. So I had a long ways to go. I had a lot of improvement that I could find in public speaking. But doing that, getting over my fear of speaking, and then I would speak about things that would make me cry. And I would just intentionally do that. Just say whatever the hardest thing I had to say to cry in front of these people that I hardly knew got me to a point where I could share my story candidly with anybody. And I think that was unique too. And just seeing how helpful that was for veterans that I was working with made me realize like, I don't want to take the time to get a business off the ground and hire employees for this. I'm just going to go all in on the programs and figure out how to help as many people as we can right away. And that's really what spawned the organization, 23rd Veteran.
Yeah. Something that just jumped out at me is you talked about developing, your ability to speak and talk in front of other people, is vulnerability. And my experience of serving around with the Marine Corps, that's not a value or attribute that is emphasized in the Marine Corps, or at least among many of the Marines that I was around, is like being vulnerable, being willing to be open and vulnerable. So what role do you think that played in your healing, being willing to sort of share all of the parts of you and not just the parts that make you look good?
Oh, that played a significant role. I mean, that's part of what therapy is. But instead of a therapist helping me find what I need to share, maybe what I'm hiding, what I'm vulnerable about, I was searching for it within myself and sharing it within, sharing it with a group of people that I hardly knew, and then shared it often. So vulnerability also has a lot to do with building trust in relationships. Obviously, there's a chemical that I like to talk about called oxytocin. And one of the ways I share just an analogy on how to access our oxytocin, or how to get to a level of actually trusting people. So when you can feel comfortable being vulnerable with them. So being comfortable being vulnerable with somebody is when you're at a level of trust where you're in the same tribe, you're on the same team, and you know that you have each other's back. So to be able to do that with others is helpful for me, clearly. But then being the first one to be vulnerable is helpful for them to trust me and be vulnerable for themselves.
Yeah. So how do you find that you've been able to encourage the veterans that are a part of 23rd Veteran to have this willingness to be open and vulnerable?
I can speak on like the systematic approach to this. So I don't look at myself as like the professional that brings vulnerability out in people. I can display what it is to be vulnerable for myself. I can do that in front of others, and that might be the catalyst that sparks that for them. But what we really rely on is that outdoor wellness adventure. So the first week in this program, I'll start with this. Is this a good time to get into the program? Do you want to talk about
Yeah, exactly.
Can I ask one question
go ahead,
before
Adam.
we do? Because I'm thinking I definitely want to go there, but I'm also thinking statistically, and I know this from Brandon, 1% of the United States serves in the military. Am I getting that right? So probably very few people listening to this will have a context, unless you send it out, which I hope you do. So I have a question from a non-veteran perspective. you have, when you told your story, you said there was pre-combat and post-combat, and that your brain changed. And one of the things that I was really curious in some of my conversations with Brandon was sort of what leads people to serve, and what tools do they give you to face what you face over there in combat. Kind of just sharing a little bit more of your story for those that those of us that haven't experienced anything like what you experienced, what got you into doing it, and then also a little bit bigger context for how you were prepared for what you encountered or not would be great.
And I think that might relate to what Brandon shared on working with Marines for such a long time, and they're not really vulnerable group of people, maybe not allowed to be vulnerable group of people. From my experience, the Marine Corps boot camp is 13 weeks long, and it focuses on actively training not just our bodies but our minds on being comfortable with combat. And it's a hard way to say it, but it's true, especially people that aren't in, haven't had military experience. Like, if you can imagine just being taken from wherever you are in life right now, being put into, get on an airplane, go somewhere else and kill people. Like, that's a really harsh way to look at it, but it's kind of true. Like, it would be very difficult for you to do that, I'd imagine, average person. So to get you to a place where you're comfortable getting on an airplane, going to someplace else and killing people takes a very large change in our brain, put it that way. So the Marine Corps boot camp, those 13 weeks, it's an active mind and body training to being comfortable in combat and doing just that. The way that the Marine Corps does it, at least I can speak from my personal experience, and this is back in 2000. I know things have changed since the year 2000, but it is completely immersive around life, death, and dying. And like, for instance, when we go to a chow hall, when we're going to eat in boot camp, before you're allowed to walk into the door of the chow hall, you have to scream blood makes the grass grow, kill, 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 like 5 times. Okay, now you can go in the chow hall. And now when you're in the chow hall, you get a glass of water. You're going to carry your water from the water station to your seat. You have to scream live grenade the whole time you're carrying water. And these are just small examples of what's happening constantly every day, screaming blood, death, and kill for 13 weeks. And we're tying in the physical fitness and the camaraderie portion of it. We're not allowed to be vulnerable, or what we call it is holding our bearing in the Marine Corps. So you're not allowed to show your emotions. And our brain, most parts of our brain are much like any other muscle. The less we use it, the less strength it's going to have. So if we don't use our emotions, we're not going to have our emotions, which is a very positive thing when we're in combat. So all of these changes are happening. Like, we're doing this in the Marines, whether or not we deploy to a hostile environment. We do this intentionally so that we are able to carry out the jobs that we need to carry out. And I hope I don't make it sound like I think any of this is a bad thing. I think this is a necessary thing for us to maintain a world power, to be a free country. Like, we need to have people that are comfortable doing these things to defend our country and to help other countries. But it's definitely real. What we don't have in the military is an active training to go back to civilian life. So we changed our brain in combat. We changed our brain in boot camp. This entire time we're focused on being a successful militant. And the military is great at creating people that are successful militants. But there's no active training on rewiring our brain or retraining our brain not to think that way. So we're dropping, just like we're dropping the example I gave, if you drop a civilian into a combat environment with no training, how uncomfortable that would be. We're taking these people that have all this military training and drop them in a civilian environment. If you struggle, there's help for you, and that's not much more training than that. Leaving the military, at least from my experience. So,
and you have to and someone has to, like, your partner at the time had to drive you to the VA hospital to get the help. They're not, you have to identify that you're struggling after you've suffered and suffered and suffered and not known why. Someone has to say, hey, maybe you should get some help, versus let's prepare you to re-enter in a good way, right? Let's give you the tools. If I think about that in the inverse, like send someone like me over into combat and I come screaming back in tears before someone says, here, let me train you how to do this. Right. So you actually have to.
Right. And I
which
think
is
what's not always understood.
Sounds pretty backwards.
The Department of Defense is where like all the military funding fits under, is separate from the VA, the Veterans Administration, where the veteran funding fits under. So there's a gap there between what we're spending on people while they're in the military and what we can spend on people when they're not in the military. And there isn't a very good filler for that gap. Like, who's going to spend the money on getting people to not in the military anymore? So you're right about that. And there's not a lot of help in getting enrolled in the VA from the military side. I imagine that has gotten better. At least there wasn't a lot of help when I got out of the military. It was, this is the information. If you choose to use the Veterans Administration, you're welcome to figure out how to do it.
So a question that I was going to pose to you, Mike, as we get ready to talk about like the specifics of 23rd Veteran. Before we get there, I'm curious about what outdoor wellness did to help you become more vulnerable. And you talked a little bit about being outside and doing some skiing. Was there any other events that you participated in an outdoor wellness type environment that kind of helped you like learn to be a little bit more vulnerable or a little bit more open?
I definitely participated in some outdoor wellness, and I was out in North Carolina with an organization in probably 2014, 2015, so around the same time as starting 23rd Veteran. And I could probably relate this to why we send veterans to outward or outdoor wellness more than my own experience in outdoor wellness, but they're both related. Which I think I started to talk on. I must have went off on a tangent and didn't finish that part. When we're in an uncomfortable, unfamiliar environment and having to survive with each other, it is so much easier to build that camaraderie and to trust each other than if that wasn't the case. I like to give an example on this too, another analogy. So if we picture, say we're taken hostage in North Korea and we're in a dungeon. We're like put in a cell. Nobody speaks English or the language that we're able to speak. And we've been there for 5 weeks, no contact with home. We don't know if we're going to get any phone calls or ever survive. And then somebody from your state gets thrown in the cell next to you. So this person's from the US, they speak your language, you're able to communicate, and it's probably like an amazing relief to have somebody else there that's just like you, that you can connect with. And you're probably going to build a bond really quickly. You're going to trust them more than you trust anybody else in that time. Now, if you're just walking down the street in the city and you came across that same person in a crowd, are you going to trust them? So being in that uncomfortable and unfamiliar environment and surviving together, it is so much easier, I've found, to be vulnerable, to open up those doors and realize how similar we are. And it doesn't matter if we're military or civilian, what we've done in life. We have so many similarities that we overlook every day. But an environment like that, it's easy to realize that we've just had different experiences in life. And other than that, we're all people.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And when you went to North Carolina, can you tell us more about that experience?
Yeah, my experience in North Carolina. So it was a 6-day backpacking trip at Table Rock, and there was probably 12 veterans with us. And at the time, I didn't fly. I think I mentioned earlier I had a panic attack on an airplane, and then I kept having panic attacks on airplanes. They became triggers for me. In hindsight, I think the initial trigger was this crowded group of people I didn't know. I was on an airplane with a whole bunch of people. I didn't have many military friends with me, and that is what triggered the panic attack. But then the airplane itself became a trigger. Just seeing airplanes fly, I would get extremely nervous, even if I wasn't getting on the thing. So I didn't fly for quite a while. So I drove to North Carolina from northern Minnesota. It was about a 22-hour drive for this outdoor wellness adventure. When I arrived, yeah, I think there was a dozen of us there. And the very first night, so we bring some of our gear. They gave us some of their gear. We ended up having packs that were probably 40 pounds that we hiked with. We hiked maybe 5 miles the first day. The very first night, initially, there's not a lot of bond. There's not a lot of trust. We just met these people. We assume, and I say we, I should probably be speaking from my own experience. So I assume that I'm not going to trust them like I don't trust anybody else at the time. And that didn't change for the first night. It was really difficult to sleep. So uncomfortable, like I said, unfamiliar environment, middle of the woods. Even though I'm an outdoors person, it wasn't, it wasn't the place I wanted to be at that moment. Next day, we get up, get to see the sunrise, cook breakfast. We start to get to know each other a little bit. Maybe that first day was a bit rushed too. So we did a bunch of hiking up to 10 miles the second day, and then we had a fire that evening. And that fire was really the catalyst for us to start sharing with each other and start opening up and being a little more vulnerable. And I don't know how much the fire itself has to do with it, or that we were doing what it takes to survive together for that entire day. We each get our own duties. Somebody's cooking, somebody's going gathering water, somebody's gathering firewood, and we're becoming a team. And for me and for others that were on that trip, it had been a long time since we actually had a team. So the second night became a lot easier to sleep. But I can remember from moving forward from there, we did some other exercises in the outdoors. We did some games that we played. Every day we were hiking 5 to 10 miles. We did some rock climbing. That rock climbing, that was a really big step in the vulnerability. If it doesn't take very long to build trust with the person that's holding the rope, that's holding your life. And I'm afraid of heights. I love rock climbing for that reason, because I'm afraid of heights. When I'm on the rock, the only thing I'm thinking about is what I'm holding on to and how I'm not going to die. Even though I'm on a rope and it's very safe, rock climbing is a relatively safe sport. It's a forced meditation for me. So we did that in this outdoor wellness, and the nights became not only easier to sleep, but better sleep. And this is true from different outdoor things I've done since then. Is I've got a bad back from the Marine Corps. I've got spondylolisthesis, something that happened to me during martial arts training. But sleeping in that environment, I don't know if it's the hard ground itself or if it's more mental, but I get such better sleep and I wake up such more refreshed and less pain in my back than sleeping in a comfortable bed. By night 5, I don't want to leave. Anytime that I spend more than 3 nights in the woods, I don't want to go back to society. At least not the society that I've been living in, I should say, for the last 20 years.
Just as an aside, I personally am convinced that there's something around the campfire that helps trigger that release of oxytocin. I'd have to do some more scientific digging to come up with the explanation, but just in my own experience, there really is something about being around a fire with people and beginning to open up and share your story. to share one story. So I'm convinced that the fire in of itself plays a key role. At least that's been my experience. So by the time you leave this outdoor wellness experience in North Carolina, what happened to your panic attacks after that? Did you notice any difference?
I stopped having them before that experience.
Okay. So they'd stopped prior to that.
They did. Yeah. I don't have a lot to answer for you other than that. It was February of 2013 was my last panic attack.
Okay. Yeah. So what led, I guess the part of curiosity again is kind of like, okay, yeah, this was great for me, and now I'm going to sort of make this like a critical element of this vision I have for 23rd Veteran. Can you talk about a little bit about that? So the vision of 23rd Veteran of having all the components, and maybe this is where you can just kind of lay out the story of the development of 23rd Veteran.
Sure. I'll start with that. Like why the outdoor wellness portion of 23rd Veteran? Why is that an integral part? A clear memory of mine, leaving that trip that I was just talking about to North Carolina, and there was 12 of us on there. We built such tight camaraderie when we were leaving. Most went to the airport. Since I drove, I gave some folks a ride to the airport, right alongside the buses. So we were saying our goodbyes at the airport, and that was a really sad moment. That was the first time I had to say goodbye to friends since 2004. So realizing that, I had a thought in my mind, like, what if we didn't have to say goodbye? What if we could do this and we were all from the same place? But I think the larger catalyst to adding this and making it an integral requirement for our 14-week program is that camaraderie building, that trust building, because we get very vulnerable throughout this program. So to start it in an outdoor wellness adventure like this, not only leads to our comfort being vulnerable with each other throughout the program, but it builds those bonds that we want so that we show up for the rest of the program. So this program is based in fitness. We use functional fitness gyms, often CrossFit gyms. We have some very solid rules for it, strict rules to follow. It's a really big commitment, and it would be really easy for people to do the outdoor wellness if they were in it just for the outdoor wellness and then not do the rest. But once we do the outdoor wellness and we build these bonds, not only is it easier to show up to the gym together, but we want to be there. That's the place that we want. That's where our friends are. And for a lot of us, we haven't had that type of friendship in a long time. So the way the program works, we start with its outdoor wellness, and we commit to 5 rules. And this is before we begin. So we do an orientation the night before we fly to this distant outdoor wellness adventure. And that's when our rules start. Number 1 is to show up throughout the entire program for everything we do, both mentally and physically. Number 2 is no complaining. So for 14 weeks, we're going to do our best to find the positive side in everything that we're doing. At the least, not vocalizing our complaints. Number 3 is no war stories. So this particular program, we're focused on creating new memories, new positive memories, linking them to these negative triggers. So not only do we want to be thinking about our negative memories at that time, we don't want to be triggering others to think about their negative memories during that time. There's a time and place for war stories, just not in these 14 weeks, not in this program. No abusing medication, alcohol, drugs. So there's no drinking for those 14 weeks either. And then the final one is no watching the news. There's studies that show that watching the news for as little as 3 minutes in the morning, people will report having a worse day 8 hours later than those who didn't watch the news, or those that watched some sort of positive newscast. So we show up, there's no complaining, there's no war stories, there's no alcohol, drug, or medication abuse, and no watching the news. And this is what they're committing to for 14 weeks. Every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, they have to show up at the gym. So we do the outdoor wellness, and then Monday, we all show up at the gym together. We do a 1-hour workout followed by half an hour positive psychology. So the whole purpose of that workout for us is the memory benefits. And that's pretty unique. There's not a lot of programs. I haven't seen any programs other than this one taking advantage of the memory benefits, intentionally taking advantage of that after a workout. You know, we get our endorphins, we got our dopamine. There's a lot of positive scientific evidence behind working out. But when we get our heart rate up to an aerobic state, at least an aerobic state, so pretty much sweat, for 20 minutes is shown to release our maximum levels of brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So that's abbreviated BDNF, and that's our neuron growth hormone, or our brain growth hormone. So BDNF acts like a steroid for our memory. So as long as we sweat for 20 minutes, we do a cool down period for the next 4 hours, and it's even shown up to 2 days later, we can remember things a lot better than if we didn't work out, if we didn't get our heart rate up. So we do this 1 hour workout. Now our memory steroid's available. We sit down on the gym floor and we do our positive psychology right there. And that's where we're often getting into vulnerability. During this positive psychology session, we're hitting on some important chemicals for our happiness, for our well-being. Oxytocin. That one, particularly hit on that one by being vulnerable and building trust, not only in the group, but then at home. We do our discussion question in the group, and then we get a homework item that's based on that discussion question, and we do the similar things at home. And then the next day we report it in our group chat. So 3 different times we get to hit this happiness chemical. And then we have serotonin weeks, and that's more of our purpose. That's serving others. It's feeling respected. Same thing. We do it in the gym floor. We go home, do the homework, report the next day. We have some weeks that are based in anger, meditations, spiritualness. So throughout these 14 weeks, we're really focusing on utilizing that brain-derived neurotrophic factor to drop our old negative habits, build new positive habits that are based in positive psychology. And when it comes to the trigger retraining, on the weekends, on Saturdays, we go and do things out in town together, and our loved ones are invited. And these things are based on common triggers from the military. So a really common one is people we don't know. Like, that's unfortunately a trigger for us. If they're not in a uniform, we're looking for the weapon. It doesn't matter if it's man, woman, or child. We haven't fought an enemy that wears a uniform in quite a few years. So in the military, we're training our brains not to trust anybody. So the first trigger retraining session, we go to a crowded restaurant. We set it up for dinner time, and Saturday we sit in the middle of the restaurant, but we do it with this new trusting team. We do our gratitudes. Every day in the gym, we're doing our gratitudes. Every time we get together on Saturdays, we do our gratitudes, and we're having fun, and we have our loved ones with us. And our subconscious memory then can start to build a crowded restaurant into being a fun and trusting environment rather than a place that's full of possible enemy. And then we upgrade those triggers throughout the program. The next time we go out on a Saturday, we go bowling, so there's a little bit louder noises. We'll go to trampoline parks, so the ground is shaking, kids are screaming, and eventually we're shooting guns together, or we go to a fireworks show. And we just have a blast while we're doing it. So the whole purpose of this program is to retrain us to be comfortable in civilian environment. Like we talked about, 13 weeks is what I went through in the Marine Corps to be comfortable in the military environment. This is a 14-week program to be comfortable in the civilian environment, retrain these triggers out of us, learn how to live a positive life, and build the habits to continue doing that after the program.
How many veterans have gone through the program?
We've had just over 100 veterans.
All right.
You know, there's another unique and important part of it too, is we have some civilians join.
Yeah.
We invite up to one civilian from each group to go through the entire group with the veterans. And then 4 weeks in, we can add 4 more civilians to the team. And once we do, we don't define who's veteran, who's military, who's civilian. We're just all participants and we're all people. And that way we can start to learn to cross that military civilian divide. Veterans are actually challenged for those 4 civilians come in. We do some Dale Carnegie style training, some building friends and influence style training. And then the veterans are challenged. They're told the civilians, rightfully so, are going to be nervous joining this group on Monday. So here we have a bunch of military and veterans that have this tight team. They've been working out together for weeks. Oftentimes we're in a CrossFit gym and we're bringing in people that have never done CrossFit. So they're intimidated from 3 different angles.
Yeah.
And it's our participants' duty to make them feel welcome on the team, make them feel like they're going to be part of the team, and use your training to do so. So not only are we learning how to welcome civilians on our team, we're learning how to welcome ourselves amongst the civilian team again.
Yeah. Why is that so important for you guys? I mean, and what's the divide? If you could talk a little bit more about that divide and how it impacts veteran wellness and maybe social wellness on a larger scale too.
Yeah. I can start with a comment that I've gotten more than once from veterans when telling them about this program and what it is, what it's like to join it. Once they find out civilians are involved, I've had, like I said, more than one civilian or a veteran say, I would love this, but there's no way I'm going to be involved. Like, there's a civilian there, I'm not going to do it. Well, that's exactly why we have civilians involved, is that mindset. It is so hard to live life in a civilian world if we don't identify as a civilian, or if we don't know how to get along with civilians. I mean, that doesn't have to be your complete identity, but I should say the other way is to identify as I am not a civilian. It makes it difficult. It's hard to build those bonds, whether it's at home, friendships, at work, coworkers, universities, trying to go to school with other people, and just feeling like we are outcast or we're isolated even when we're around people is a difficult place for our minds. And it's just difficult to stay involved in those groups at that point. I don't know what the current research is. This is probably 6 years old now. I think it was a study by IVMF, Institute for Military and Veteran Families, showed that 80% of veterans were leaving their career within the first 2 years after the military. Their first career, they'd leave within 2 years. There were similar studies about the attrition rate for veterans in college. And why this happens? That's a really good question. And I'm sure there's some people out there that have a really good answer for it. From my experience in the Marines, almost every day, I would say multiple times a day, we had this phrase called nasty civilian. So if there was anything ever wrong with your uniform, your face, your hair, you're a nasty civilian. Like if the line wasn't correctly on your belt, quit being a nasty civilian. And this is just drilled into us for years on how nasty civilians are. And then they say, okay, you're a civilian, go enjoy the world. So it's really hard to identify, as being a nasty after the military, where, again, that's not necessarily bad when you're in the military. I mean, all these things that we're talking about, these are really good things for a military environment. It's just so hard to be successful in the civilian world when that's our mindset.
I was just going to say, as you were talking about the integration piece, which, like you, I think is so important for the military person to figure out how do I trust the civilian person again? How do I build those bonds so that I can, have a successful life outside of the military? I was going to just sort of ask you about this last cohort that went to Southern California. From my understanding, is the first time that 23rd Veterans sent a civilian as a part of the wilderness outdoor wellness component. And I'm curious as to how you think that went, or from your side, or how you think it's going now that they're back there in Minnesota. If you saw any big differences in having the civilians start with the cohort versus joining in, partway through.
Sure. So we've actually been doing that since 2018, sending a civilian on the outdoor wellness component as well. What really sticks out for me, the coolest thing is almost every time we hear very similar feedback, like, you chose just the right civilian. Like, there's nobody else that this would have worked with, but this person was perfect. This is an honorary veteran. And they use that term as well. Multiple groups have done that. Where from my point of view, I don't think it was necessarily, I mean, they are amazing people we send with, but it's not really because it was that person that became an honorary veteran. It's because we learned how to build that trust again. It's because we learned that we are the same people, and we can build that across that divide if we are intentional about it, especially if we're in an uncomfortable and unfamiliar environment. Doing that through the wellness in the outdoors. And then, after they come back, it's wonderful. And like I said, in our program, we don't distinguish who's civilian, who's veteran. We don't show up and say, okay, the civilian's going to do this. We're all the same people. We all become graduates. We're all invited to the same graduate. I guess the only difference between veterans and civilians of the program is civilians are paying their own way through it, where veterans were using funds raised for 23rd Veteran to pay their way. Yeah, and
it sounds like
at the. Go ahead, Brendan.
I was just going to say, it sounds like one of the core messages that you're trying to get both the veteran and the civilian to sort of like internalize is that you matter like I matter. You're not better than me. You're not lower than me, but you're a fellow human traveler in this journey of life, and we both equally matter.
That's a really, really good way to put that.
I heard something else too, which I thought was, I'm curious what you think about this. And Brandon, it reminds me of that first recorded conversation that we did on the podcast. We were talking about your experience as a chaplain. It sounds like it's really important for military to identify as military and sort of separate off, like Brandon, you talked about rites of almost like a rite of passage culture within the Marine Corps. Like you go into that experience and then you're a Marine for life. Right. And so the dirty civilian story, that's what made me think about it, is, okay, we're making a break from that lifestyle, just the day-to-day, reaping the benefits, but maybe not, participating in the same way of protecting those. And you talked about the Vikings too, like to be really at the top of your game, you almost have to fully identify as part of that team. And to break from that, it's like, it's us and them, right? It's like, okay, if you really want to be part of us, you got to be almost like an initiation, be a really strong part of us. And I think what you're talking about, Brandon, is this, and I experienced this on our trip with 23rd Veteran and in many other experiences with young people too, in particular, that almost like a human tribe forms, and it doesn't matter who's there. You can be an honorary veteran. I saw that, and I thought I was brought to tears by a very similar welcoming of the civilian on our trip, and welcoming of me and Miriam. But one human tribe that travels through this experience together, and then you can feel that bond, and that identity becomes so much bigger than civilian, veteran, Viking, CEO, whatever, even adult and child, right? That becomes one tribe. And I'm curious about that in terms of that, the necessity of that for going into combat, but then, not supporting the dropping of that, and welcome. And Brandon, of course, you pass out that book, Tribe, welcoming back our responsibility as civilians and a civilian culture to say, actually, we're all part of the same tribe. And thank you for, honoring that, not just not just with words, but with culture, with a culture that has a place for that, for the leaving and the coming back. So I'm just witnessing that, and made me think of some things, and wanted to, kind of throw those out there, offer something up from the backseat here.
Yeah, in that tribe, it's important to identify that way when you're in the military. It's important for Vikings to identify that way if they want to be successful at beating their enemy. And then having that bond with each other, knowing that, identifying what sets us apart from others can help us build that bond. And that's an important part of life. But you brought up identity a few times, and identifying as human, while that can be beneficial for that job while you're identifying as identified as a Marine, you identify as a Viking. It's really difficult when you no longer have that job, because then you're also losing your identity. So personally, uh, I definitely learned to focus on identifying with something that I can't lose.
Even someone who, is the CEO of a company or a part of a company and they lose their job, they have that same crisis, maybe small, in a smaller scale, but that same crisis of what's my purpose here? Where do I belong? And there's just almost zero tools for finding that in a meaningful way, that are, readily available, because they can, all of that identity can be taken away, or has a necessary end, right?
Mike, what I was going to share was that I think that for me has been one of the most powerful things about the wilderness component of this, is those gatherings around the fire, as we have these more intimate conversations. People witness who the other people are around the fire in a really, really powerful, intimate way. And then they're seen as being a person, not as, oh, I'm a Marine, I'm an Army vet, I'm a, whatever it is. No, you're a person of worth. And it was really interesting on this last trip, after the first night's conversation around the fire, one of the guys mentioned just how powerful having that level of witnessing and listening was to him. Like he said, I'd never experienced anything like that before. And so I think that becomes part of, for me, the beauty of the wilderness portion is it gives the veterans, the civilians, anybody who comes out there, the way that wilderness portion is structured, or at least how Adam and I and Miriam are doing it, is it really, really brings out the core of who that individual is. That you are a person of value and worth, regardless of whatever title you are. So if you were, whatever that was, that's not who you are. And sitting around the fire, for the first time, people really begin to be seen for who they are and to be cared for. And even, I'll use this word that you don't use too often in the Marine Corps, loved as a human.
Yeah, and some details we haven't shared about that with the outdoor wellness too is, like, cell phones aren't allowed, not used for 5, 6, 7 days. And just to experience that and being able to be present with each other, something that humans used to do all the time. Like, this is weird that we're not always present with each other, and that we have to get on this airplane and go to some adventure in the mountains to actually be present with one another. But yeah, to be able to connect on a human level like that, and again, after a hard day's work around the fire, and to sit down and actually be able to listen and ask questions, deep questions, and drill into what people are sharing, is something that I believe humanity should have, and we have at least temporarily lost that with the technological revolution.
So you're an optimist, Mike, with the temporarily.
Temporarily, yes.
We'll get it back. I hope so.
So, Mike, as this podcast heads out there, into the into the World Wide Web and the podcast space, a couple of things I'm thinking of is, one is, what would you want someone to know about how they could maybe help with 23rd Veteran?
With the organization, like help the nonprofit.
Yeah. How would someone's listening and they hear about this mission and what you're accomplishing, what would you invite them to do?
There's a couple things. I mean, there's generally three ways. Maybe we can even go four different ways to support nonprofit organizations. Obviously, the one that matters a lot is funding, so making donations. But this one, there's 23rdveteran.org. You can find all that information. Social media as well. Pretty much Google 23rd Veteran. Probably find what you'd want to look for. There's in-kind donation. So that's generally donating items, not finances. For 23rd Veteran, there's not a lot of, we're not continuously looking for items. But if there's somebody with a connection to something that is outdoor wellness related or fitness related, a company that likes to donate and sponsor by donating items like packs or gym membership, something like that, that would be helpful. It's an in-kind donation. There's volunteering. So it's donating time. That would be the third way. Always looking for volunteers. If you're if you want to do in-person volunteering, we're in a few different cities right now. We're in northern Minnesota, Duluth, Minnesota, Twin Cities area, Minneapolis, St. Paul. We are in Philadelphia area, running a program shortly in Delaware. And then the last one would be your connections. So helping through connections. So when it comes to our programs, we mentioned we have 12 veterans that go through this program at once, up to 12. And it costs us about $75,000 to run one of these programs. So maybe $6,500 per veteran. And what's extremely helpful is having veterans like at the ready that want to be a part of this, or a company that will support them, or a university that will support them being a part of it. Because it's really difficult. We mentioned a few times, it's a huge commitment. You have to take this week off of life for the outdoor person. Then you need to take 2 hours off every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or figure out how to be at a gym for 2 hours for the workout and the positive psychology and hopefully showering up. And then, so to get 12 people to commit to it and to be able to make that commitment in life, we usually find 30 or 40 veterans. So where I'm getting at is, if you know a company that has a lot of veterans, or a university that's veteran military friendly, or a military unit, we can do this for the military as well, right in the units. We're looking for what's called anchor organizations. So if they will support 6 of their military veterans in this program by allowing them to take a week off of work, a lot of times the FMLA leave applies, and then also allow them to work out and do the positive psychology on the clock. So we can do it right at the beginning of their shift, or depending on what type of work it is, might be right before their shift, maybe it's not even shift work. 2 hours on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So a week off for the outdoors, 2 hours on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. If a company will support 6 veterans military going through this program, then we will run the program in their area. So we'll come to their city, wherever they're at. We can do it in their business if they have facilities in their business, or we'll do it nearby. And we can fill in the rest of the program with local veterans as well, so if they don't have the full 12. And then the big bonus here, not only do the veterans get to build this camaraderie in the workplace, but the civilians we add, we're looking for coworkers. So we want to send 1 coworker through the whole program and have up to 4 more coworkers join, or co-students if it's at a university, join at week 4 and build this cross this divide right in the business or university that we're in. So there's the ways. There's financially donating, volunteering if you're in one of the areas that we're serving, in-kind donations, and connecting with organizations that want to support their veterans through the programs, all found at 23rdveteran.org, or Facebook, or LinkedIn. Or we have a really fun event too, called Ruck Life. So that's where the majority of our fundraising comes from. It's a ruck march. So in the military, a ruck march is where we put our packs on and we go for a hike. We carry everything we need in combat in the military, but in this case, we're just carrying food and clothes. So we put a backpack on, we put food and clothes in it, and we go for up to 10-mile hike. It's 2 to 10 miles. And at the very end, we weigh our packs and we donate all of this stuff to locals in need. It goes to local veteran organizations. So at this ruck march, our fundraising goals are $75,000 to run one program. And we hit those goals in Duluth and in the Twin Cities regularly. We're still growing our Philadelphia Ruck March And those are coming up. The Minnesota ones are May 20th and August 5th. Philadelphia will be in October. But if you want to get involved in that, you can. There's people that fly in. We have people fly in from Canada, from Arizona, wherever you are, to be a part of this ruck march. You can raise money for it. You can carry food and just be a part of the fun event. The subject that we work with is not a fun subject, but we try to make the fundraising just super patriotic and positive, just like our organization's based in positivity. So there's live music, there's DJs, there's food and alcohol service on course. We don't do alcohol in the programs, but we will do it on the fundraising side. And it's so common when people leave, we get people reaching out for a full week afterwards, talking about how they're still on a life high for having been at the event. I mean, that many people that come together for the same cause, that are good people. And it is obnoxiously patriotic with the clothes that people are wearing there. It's just a really, really fun event. Maybe we can build some of that team and camaraderie around like-minded people who like to help others. That one's called Ruck Life.
I heard that is it true that you get points for wearing less clothes on that?
Yes. We could talk about that.
Has that changed? Has that changed over time?
So yeah, that was the old. So Ruck Life is the new brand. That's 2023. This used to be called the Nearly Naked Ruck March.
Okay.
It started in northern Minnesota in February, and people were challenged to wear long underwear. So if you're not from a cold climate, that's long garments, cotton wool that we put on underneath our regular daily clothes because it's so cold in the winter. So it'll get down to -40 around here. So February, the first couple events, we had -5 wind chills. People are out there nothing but long underwear or shorts. They're out there nothing, shorts and a flag. -5 degrees, walking 10 miles is incredible. So that's why we called it the Nearly Naked Ruck March. But now that we're expanding to warmer climates and warmer months of the year, it didn't make as much sense. So we are now Ruck Life.
Gotcha. I just heard rumors. Yeah, the naked thing. So I'm glad we cleared that up.
Yeah.
Another question I had about kind of not exactly this area, but a little bit, not about being nearly naked, but just as you're thinking about 23rd veteran and the ability to go do these great programs, and you're expanded now to the Philadelphia area. What's your vision for 23rd veteran over the next few years?
We want, the ultimate far end game is not the same program we're running now. It is what would be similar to boot camp coming out of the military. So actually DOD funded program that's ran by the DOD. Anybody that's been in the military for a certain amount of time or has experienced something traumatic would have to go through this active transition before becoming a civilian. That would be the end game. I think that's the lowest hanging fruit we have on this battle on combat stress. What 23rd Veterans doing in the meantime, we want to be serving in the top 50 cities. We want to be serving where veterans go after the military. So even though we're this transition from a military mindset to a civilian mindset, we are also targeting veterans that are struggling, or veterans that don't know they're struggling. Like that happens often too. People will join because they want to help their friend or they want to help somebody else. There might be maybe the outdoor wellness sparks enough interest that they join the program, but then a couple of weeks into it, they look back and think, holy cow, I was really struggling and I didn't even know it. It wasn't until I elevated myself to realize that I had a lot to elevate. So we want to serve veterans where they are and where they go to after the military. Yeah. Answer your question, Brandon?
Yeah, thank you. So the top 50 cities, is that top 50 based on U.S. population, or is it top 50 based on where the number of veterans find themselves after the military?
Veteran and military content, yes.
So where's the next one? So you got Philly, you got to hope for, all right, here's where we're headed next.
That's based on the anchor organization. So we've kind of changed our model of expansion. It used to be run the Ruck March, raise the money, and then run the program. And we were expanding the Ruck March based on sponsors. People would hear about the organizations. Hey, we'll sponsor you to come out here. We went out to expanded to California in 2019. Actually, Philly and California both in 2019. But since the pandemic, we haven't gone back to California yet. But we've changed that model. So it's based on organizations that want to serve their veterans, because we can serve so many more veterans that way. We're not wasting our resources in I shouldn't say wasting, but it's very costly in resources, amount of time and money, finding veterans who don't want to be found, finding isolated veterans. So we're basing our program off of 6 that we know will be in it, and then we'll try to fill the other 6 with veterans from the community, rather than searching for all 12 from the community.
Yeah.
And that's something I didn't speak about much earlier too, on how the program, and it's the whole premise behind positive psychology. We'll go with a scale from -10 to +10 this time. So if we think of happiness, or even, anytime we would go, anytime an ailment we might have, it could be physical, it could be mental. You look at that from -10 to +10. What most medicine is doing is trying to bring us from a negative number back to 0. Like, okay, we're struggling here, we broke a bone, or we have an illness, let's see if we can just get back to stable. The whole premise behind positive psychology, it doesn't matter where you are on that scale, you can be elevated from there. Even if you're in a positive environment, if you're a generally happy person, or successful person on what your version of success is in life, you can elevate from there. And that's really what the program's based on. And like I mentioned, a lot of times people will join thinking they're at a 5, and then 3 weeks into the program, they realize, well, maybe they were kind of hanging out at 0. Maybe they were just stable. And now they can experience life on a new level.
Yeah.
I think that's I'll go for it. No, I think that's something, all of us can consider too. That humans are so good at just coping and dealing with what's in front of us. And when someone comes and kind of takes the blinders off of our eyes and shows us how much better it can be, that's a real gift. I saw you guys, I saw that that's some of what you're doing in this work is, helping those that might not see how much they're struggling elevate themselves, to use your words. And I think that wisdom, that positive psychology can apply to all of us out here, that things can be better. And sometimes we don't realize how much we're struggling or we ignore the people that say, hey, maybe you could deal with that issue, our partners or our spouses, and we ignore it. And then one day we say, okay, yeah, maybe I will deal with that. Maybe it is something, maybe it is a thing. So
what would so we kind of talked about maybe your pitch, if you wanted to call it that, towards maybe a civilian or a non-veteran, or a veteran out there, to maybe how they could support the program. What would you say to someone who served in the military who might come across this, to I guess invite them to come and participate in 23rd Veteran? With right now you got a Philadelphia cohort, you're recruiting.
Oh, there's so many reasons. An easy one is joining that cohort. If you're not in it, and most of us aren't in it for ourselves. Like, most military and veterans don't go and try to do something for themselves. We're just that life of service is drilled into us, and that is something that you can do in the program. So the reason we want 12 people or up to 12 people in the program is that's enough for everybody throughout those 14 weeks to have people that they really relate to, people that they really bond with. It's a good diversity. So even if you're a healthy, functioning person or making solid decisions in life, to be that person that can uplift other veterans that have joined the program. That's one reason. Another one is if life sucks. And that's true for a lot of us. When we go to the numbers on that, a number that was really popular, VA came out with that study of 22 veterans killing themselves every day back in 2012. That number's changed quite a few times over the years. I don't know. It's kind of hovered between 16 and 18 over the last few years. But according to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, for every suicide, there are 27 attempts. And I don't have that math ready in my mind, but I'm going to figure it out. So let's say if it's 18 people every day are killing themselves, that's 486 attempts. And that just gives us a little bit of an inside peek at the amount of unhappiness in the veteran community. There are that many people attempting or thinking about suicide. That is an extreme number of unhappy people, generally unhappy people. That's going back to an earlier question too. One of the driving factors for starting this organization, and the whole reason for the name behind it, 23rd Veteran. I was looking at that number, that 22 number, and thinking, wow, I was almost one of those 22. So I figured the next closest thing, since I was almost there, I must have been the 23rd Veteran. I was the one that chose not to that day. So a lot of people that go through the programs will identify themselves as 23rd veterans, as they've made that choice and they're still here and they're giving back to others. So if you're one of those people that are just generally living an unhappy life, program's absolutely for you. The easiest way for me to explain or maybe motivate the just taking that leap and trying something different. This is something different. Is if you really like the way your life is going, don't change a thing. If you don't want your life to change, then don't change a thing. But if you do want your life to change, you're going to have to change something. You're going to have to try something different, something new.
Yeah. I think as I've thought about this question or a related question, one of the things that many people in the military report after getting out, and I think this is especially true of former Marines, because the Marine Corps does such a good job of creating that tight cohesion between, you and your fellow Marines, that when you get out and you lose that sense of camaraderie, I think that's one of the things that really kind of pushes people into that sense of isolation. And so doing this experience with 23rd Veteran, to come and do the wilderness piece and then do the recon piece there in the Philly area, an individual will go from, maybe having some feelings of isolation and not really feeling like they have a tribe anymore and they don't really feel like they belong, to flipping that 180. I was doing a similar program, as you know, Mike, in North Carolina with active duty Marines. And I remember one gentleman who at that current time, in his career in the Marine Corps, he was a sergeant major. And while he's out on the trip, we don't call him by their rank. He's just, whatever his name was. And I won't say his name. But he said to me, as we were getting ready to hike out on the final day, he said, I haven't felt as close to a group of people since I served in Afghanistan. And that's when I knew, kind of the power of this wilderness model of having this experience, is that he's now like super tight with this group of people. And, maybe he has, some tribe members from his time in the Marine Corps at different places, but he also has a new tribe. He has this new group of people that he's really bonded to and connected with. And I thought that was really powerful. And I think that's one of the, maybe not the selling point of the program, but I think it's one of them, is like, you really do have a sense of belonging and tribe that you might not have right now in your life.
Mm. Yeah, that's powerful, especially coming from a sergeant major in the Marine Corps. That would be a really difficult thing to share with people of a lesser rank than you.
Well, I want to thank you, Mike, for the work that you're leading or supporting. I don't know how you want to hold that for yourself, but yeah, that you're a part of. Especially that those numbers really hit hard. And when I think about the amount of support and effort it takes to get these guys, or these people, excuse me, out into the field and into these programs, and the lives that you're saving through that, I think it really, the value really stands out, um, of all the work that you put into this. And we got to see a little bit of that change in those 5 days that we were out in the wilds, with some of your crew. And yeah, it was just amazing. And to think of them, now a tribe back at home, working out together and improving their lives and improving their communities' lives. It's really powerful. So I want to thank you for your story today and all the work that you're doing. Do you have anything, Brandon, you want to say?
Yeah, not only thank you for doing this today and inviting me to be on the podcast, but to be the guides that brought them through the first part of their journey, to spend that time in Sequoia National Forest with you all. The feedback that we've heard from the veterans is just incredible. There's one particular veteran that comes to mind who's done a lot of outdoor wellness. He has gone through our program, and now he's going through as a coordinator. We often do that. We ask somebody who's gone through the program to, if they're ready to take on the responsibilities of coordinating the next and being there for the next group of veterans. So he did that, and of all the outdoor wellness he's been a part of, thinks that he had his best experience in the Sequoia National Forest with you all.
I'll just blame the snow and the flooding and the cold. It really bonded us. It bonded us all. Made our job easy.
Yeah,
there's a power in
we
adversity.
call it type 2 fun.
Yeah, type 2 fun.
Type 2 fun. Type 2 fun. Yeah. Well, thanks again, Mike. I really, really appreciate you taking the time today, and I just want to honor the calling and sense of vocation that you had, as you sort of discovered a path to healing for yourself. That it speaks a lot about you, that you didn't just like say, okay, I'm good, and move on and go do whatever and be super successful. But you realized you had found some wisdom that you could then build a program around and reach your fellow brothers and sisters that had served in the military and help them find the peace and happiness that you found as you've sort of discovered these kernels of wisdom and been able to apply them to your own life. And we are super excited to have, a partnership with you in some ways, of doing work with 23rd Veteran as we are Open Circle and being able to serve you. And I know I've been in and around 23rd Veteran for a few years now and have just been amazed with the work that you've done and have seen firsthand the impact in the veterans' lives that have gone through your program. So thank you again, and thanks for taking the time today. It's truly been an honor and a pleasure.